red runner pole beans, I think is what they were called. Frederick writes a letter to his mother explaining that he's used that material to build the labyrinth. And we don't really know how tall the labyrinth was.
Okay.
From several different accounts, it was anywhere from hip height to taller than the average person, so you couldn't see over anything. I'm sure the landscape treatment plan will give us a good idea of the dimensions of it once it's finished.
Nice. Well, that looks like it sounds like it'd be really interesting to see and hear more about that once you learn more about it. So, yeah. All right. So, next question I have is, nowadays everything seems like we're kind of in a throwaway society. Nothing is kept for very long, and a lot of times even the quality of things are not meant to last. So it always amazes me how much original stuff is in the Seward House. How is that? How did that come to be? Is it just one of those things that was kind of lucky that over the years it just kind of remained in the house, or was there a lot of research to get from the family and such to bring it back so that it could be in the house?
So the Sewards did hold on to everything, and beyond, like I was saying earlier, tables and chairs, but clothes, locks of hair, even a blood-stained bedsheet from the night that Seward was attacked, the same night that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The family kept everything.
Wow.
And some of that has to do with the culture of Victorian society, and Victorian society is 1830s to the late 1800s, so almost the entire 19th century is the Victorian era, as historians like to call it. So the culture then was very different than our culture today. So you mentioned our culture as a throwaway one. And back in the Victorian era, that wasn't the case. They held on to a lot of things. And certainly as Seward's reputation became more and more historical and his legacy was being cemented, I think the family decided to hold on to things even more so because they knew that it would be important. And that really comes to fruition when the last Seward donates the home and everything inside of it in trust to the Fred L. Emerson Foundation so that the house and everything inside of it can become a museum as a tribute to his father and his grandfather. And his grandfather was William Seward. So I think it's a combination of the culture of the Victorian era and the fact that the family knew that they would have to hold on to all that stuff if their family's legacy was going to be preserved.
Okay, all right. That's very interesting to me. Hopefully the listeners also find that interesting, just because you don't really see things handed down like it used to be. And so the fact that it sounds like it remained in the family until it was a museum, did that help to mitigate how much restoration was needed when it first became a museum?
Well, yeah, and actually increases the need for further further preservation work, because the collection is so renowned and so original. We want to make sure that it stays that way in an environment that protects it. So one of the big challenges that we're facing right now, and this is most historic house museums as well, is the need for climate control. So the only form of climate control we have in the museum right now is the 1877 radiator system that we use to heat the house in the winter. It's a pretty robust system. It actually works pretty well, despite the kind of winters we get here in central New York. But we're looking to add some humidity control and cooling as well to the museum in the next couple of years.
Very cool. What does it take to really, say you had a chair or there was a couch that needed some restoration, how does that process work? How difficult is it to find someone that can actually do it and still maintain the quality and historical preservation of that?
Well, our director of collections and exhibitions has everything in the entire museum cataloged on a software called Past Perfect. And it has the real-time location and condition of all the objects in the entire museum. So the first thing that he would likely do would be to assess the condition of the object relative to what it was the last time it was input into the Past Perfect system. And then, of course, we'd have to track down a person who specializes in collections management, a consultant or a contractor who has a very good reputation for preserving items. And you'll find that when you start researching the kinds of people that work on historical items, there's specialties. There's someone who specializes in restoring historic chairs, and someone who specializes in wallpaper and paint and brick. So there's different niches that you can tap into, which also makes it easier and harder to find someone to do the work, because you certainly have a short list of people who specialize in wallpaper, but they're typically not all in Syracuse.
Of course, of course.
So it takes a good amount of research to find the right person to work on an object.
Right. So have you had to bring people in from other states, I would assume?
Yep.
Anyone that was anything that was so specialized that actually you had to look internationally to do, or no?
I don't know. The farthest that I know we've gone is I think Boston.
Okay.
Again, our director of collections and exhibitions has a much better understanding of the kind of people that work on those objects.
All right, I won't drill you too much about it. That's a shame, because my next 8 questions was all about that topic. Jeez, I don't know.
Well, let me try.
All right. We'll just go ahead and shift gears a little bit. Then you did mention that the DRI, you did win one of the incentives, one of the awards for the DRI. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I think it's a fantastic use of the money. Just another great museum in Auburn that, seeing how you guys are funded is well deserved and well needed. So what are some of the things that are going to happen with the DRI for the Seward House?
Sure. Well, it was a great win for all of Auburn, I'll say. Auburn's application for the Downtown Revitalization Initiative was the This Place Matters campaign, which is right out of the National Trust for Historic Preservation's initiative. And Auburn does matter, and it has a number of sites that matter, and we're really fortunate at the Seward House to be recognized as one of those sites. So the money we received from DRI, which is $864,000, will be exclusively used on the barn and carriage house, 2 of the buildings I mentioned earlier. And if you're in the parking lot directly behind the Seward House Museum, they're the 2 big stone buildings.
Yes.
And as you're looking at them, the one on the left is the barn, and the one on the right is the carriage house. The barn was where the family kept all their livestock, and the carriage house is where the carriage was stored. And with the Downtown Revitalization Initiative monies, we'll be able to rehabilitate and repair those structures. So they were built in 1860. The original barn and carriage house was burned down in a fire when William Seward was running for president on the newly formed Republican ticket. And people in Auburn were not a fan of William Seward running on the Republican ticket for the presidency. He was seen as a radical, much too progressive for the 1860 Republican Party to put in the White House. So somebody from Auburn burned the barns down as a sign of protest. And we can get into the different stories of horrible things that people did to Seward's family and his pets and his property because of his political decisions, but for right now we'll just stick with this one. So they burned down the original barn and carriage house.
I think we have part 2 of this interview for next time. Jeez, that sounds really, really interesting.
No end.
We should definitely do a little bit more on that, but go ahead with your story.
So Frederick Seward designed the barn and carriage house that are there now, and he eventually moves away, and Seward passes away. There are alterations made to the buildings that weren't in the best interest of the long-term health of the buildings, because the alterations were put in places where they probably shouldn't have been put in, like a new entrance to the basement of the barn on one of the building's corners, so that when the door was cut in the foundation, that corner began to sag. And over the course of the past century, that sag has gotten worse. So the buildings are on the verge of collapse. And we needed some monies to help us repair those buildings. And there, aside from structural repairs, there'll be interior repairs, exterior masonry repairs, window and door replacements, but all done to the historic integrity of the building. So it's not going to be like Pella windows and doors going on the barns.
Right.
Specially fitted and crafted for the buildings. And then once they're in a stable state and they're repaired effectively, we'll begin interior rehabilitation work. And we have a couple of documents at the Seward House Museum that we use to execute projects and guide our vision. And one of those documents is the Facilities Master Plan, which was adopted in 2012 by the museum. And in that plan, we challenged ourselves to move staff offices out of the main building and into the second floor of the carriage house. and we challenged ourselves to display William Seward's original Wood Brothers carriage in the place where it was stored originally, in the carriage house, and use the first floor of the barn as a utilitarian space so that we can have events there and fundraisers and weddings and bridal showers and birthday parties, all this stuff as an income generator for the museum. And as the facilities manager, I would love a workshop on the basement of the barn where I could put the lawnmower and all the garden tools and have a nice place to go to work by myself for a little bit when I need to get away from everything. But that's a selfish reason for doing the project. All those other things I mentioned are great things that the DRI monies will help us accomplish.
Very cool. It sounds like it'll be a nice improvement to that space, a nice improvement to the overall feel and integrity of the property. So congratulations again on that. Look forward to seeing the progress and then hopefully taking a tour to see the finished project. Probably 2 or 3 years out at least.
2022 is when it's scheduled. So when you're in season 10 of this, you can come and record your show in the utilitarian space in the barn. We'll have it all ready for you.
Well, let's hope that people like it enough that I'm around here doing this for season 10. I'm all for that. I love doing it. I love learning more about all these great sites. So I'm down for that. It's definitely on my calendar now. So. So now I guess the next question is just, you mentioned that you guys do have events. So is there any events coming up that you would really like to promote, talk about, let the audience know when they're coming up and how they can attend it? And also, I think it's always nice to, is there volunteer opportunities that people can help out with the Seward House? So.
Well, there's always volunteer opportunities at the Seward House. There's 3 main ways to volunteer. You can give tours of the museum, you can work at the front desk, or you can help me outside in the gardens. But between those 3 jobs, there's always something for people to help us out with.
All right. So there you go. If you're looking for a volunteer opportunity, you can go work in a beautiful historical building.
That's right
here in Auburn. So what's a better way to volunteer?
I can't think of a better way to volunteer.
I had a feeling you might say that, but yeah.
I'm biased. I do have a couple of events here, and I have my little cheat sheet here. This Thursday, actually, the 22nd, at 7 p.m. at the Seward House, we have Tom Ebert coming to talk about the man in Lincoln's shadow. And Tom Ebert is going to be talking about Lincoln Secretary John Nicolay for that lecture. And Nicolay observed the relationship between Lincoln and Seward during the American Civil War, so that should be a really amazing lecture. Very insightful.
What time was that?
7 o'clock on August 22nd. You can call the museum or go to sewardhouse.org to find out more information about that. Similar to all the other cultural sites here in Auburn, we have a First Friday event coming up in September, on the first Friday of September, on September 6th. And then the big event coming up is September 14th, which is Girl Scout Badge Day. We'll have a Seward House patch that we'll be giving to Brownie and Girl Scouts that show up to the museum that day. Festivities start at 8:30 and go all day until 5. It involves 2-hour tours of the museum that are led by professional educators. And this event is actually sanctioned by the Girl Scouts. So GSNY Penn Council has actually worked with us to develop this event. So it's a real event for the Girl Scouts. And its main purpose is to celebrate Constitution Day and also the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which happened 100 years ago and gave women the right to vote in this country. So what better way to celebrate that?
Exactly. And it's always good that all our youth, not just the Girl Scouts, but girls and boys alike, learn about it and learn what the importance of that is. So
That's
definitely
right.
a great time to bring out your kids, regardless of age, to hear more about that.
And I should mention that last event, the Girl Scout event, was actually developed by a summer intern that we had at the museum this year. So aside from volunteer opportunities, if you know anyone who is looking for an internship during or immediately after college, the Seward House is a great place to come and intern because it leads to transformative events like that.
All right, fantastic. Is there any other events that you want to touch on, or is that good for right now?
I think that's good for right now.
All right, fantastic. So we're at the point of the show where I ask the last question, and if you've listened to the podcast, you know this is a personal question for you because Life is definitely about connections, experiences, and this brings the personal aspect